At the height of his political career as vice president to George W. Bush, Dick Cheney was well aware of his public persona, sardonically calling himself Darth Vader. The constant, still presence off to the side, the not-so-hidden hand of power.
I picked him because he's strong, he's steady, and he gets the job done.
He'd been asked by Bush to help him find a running mate. Instead, he took on a role he'd once called cruddy, remaking it into something else entirely, as reimagined on screen.
I can handle the more mundane jobs, overseeing bureaucracy, military, energy, and foreign policy.
The idea of such total dominance, long challenged by supporters and critics. No real debate, though, that his was America's most powerful vice presidency. He literally called the shots from under the White House in the hours after the attacks on September 11th, 2001. And 9/11 would dominate the Bush presidency, especially through Cheney's determination not just to take the new war on terror to Afghanistan, but to Iraq.
And we have to be concerned about the potential marriage, if you will, between a terrorist organization like Al-Qaeda and those who hold or are proliferating knowledge about weapons of mass destruction.
As Defense Secretary in the first Gulf War, Cheney had warned of the dangers of trying to remove Saddam Hussein from power, but he never resiled from the decision to do just that in 2003. No matter the estimated hundreds of thousands of deaths, the failure to find a link between Saddam and Al-Qaeda, or indeed to find any weapons of mass destruction. His was the 1% doctrine, act against a potential major threat even if its probability was just 1 in 100. It justified for him sweeping new surveillance powers at home and the brutal treatment of detainees in Guantanamo Bay and elsewhere. In Washington, bureaucratese enhanced interrogation. A Senate committee would later call it torture. Cheney said he'd do it again in a minute. Cheney had been an insider since his 20s, mentored by Donald Rumsfeld, succeeding him to become the youngest ever White House Chief of Staff at 34 to President Gerald Ford. After a decade in Congress and a stint as Defense Secretary, he headed up the industrial giant Halliburton, which would later gorge on government contracts during the Iraq War. By that time in Bush's second term, relations between the men were on the wane, strained further when the vice president accidentally shot an acquaintance in the face and chest while hunting duck and failed to report it for nearly a day.
We can't get bin Laden, but we nailed a 78-year-old attorney.
The victim later apologized to Cheney for the trouble caused. For the most part an uncompromising social conservative, Cheney opposed a federal ban on gay marriage, supportive of his daughter Mary when she came out in her teens.
As many of you know, one of my daughters is gay. I think people ought to be free to enter into any kind of union they wish.
It was his support for his other daughter, Liz, the leading Republican critic of President Trump, that dominated his politics in his last years, spurred by the January the 6th insurrection.
In our nation's 246-year history, there has never been an individual who is a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump.
So far today, no comment from President Trump, the Republican Speaker of the House seemingly torn between President and God as he searched for something to say.
Scripture is very clear. We give honor where honor is due, and someone who gave their life, loved their country, loved serving their country in so many capacities.
Dick Cheney suffered the first of 5 heart attacks at 37. He had a heart transplant aged 71. He died yesterday aged 84 from complications of pneumonia and cardiac and vascular disease.
Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Ron Suskind, who's written extensively about Dick Cheney and the war on terror. Ron Suskind, thanks very much for coming on the programme. I mean, you heard that piece there. He had an extraordinary life, did he not, at the very heart of American power. How do you explain the fact that he just kept cropping up in one Oval Office after another?
He was the man who never left. I mean, it's extraordinary when you look across really modern history. Remember, he was there with Nixon as the young aide. He was chief of staff to Gerald Ford. He was defense secretary on George H.W. Bush. And then he was really the man in charge in a lot of ways for George W. Bush. That was really a co-presidency. Often it was really Cheney guiding events. I mean, no one really can match that in terms of his consequence across really 4 decades, frankly. It's extraordinary.
And I think he had his first heart attack when he was in his late 30s, and then 3 more after that, and he survived them all until today, of course. But what was his particular talent? in politics? What did he know that other people didn't know?
He was a brilliant manager of power and also of people. He was able to build constructs in which he could exercise power in all sorts of ways, and also manage the people above him, including presidents in most instances, because there was often no one much above him except the president. I mean, in some ways, Cheney's legacy is as he's kind of an American Richelieu. He was the man who really changed, shaped, and drove events for many presidents. As you know, when you hear him speak, everything Dick Cheney said sounded reasonable, even if it seemed, frankly, sometimes half crazy. But presidents listened to him and were directed by him, especially George W. Bush, where for the first term of George W. Bush's presidency, it was very significantly Cheney's presidency.
Yeah, the joke, I think, at the time was that President Bush was only one heartbeat away from the vice presidency. But also, of course, I'm glad you're laughing. Maybe you hadn't heard that one.
That was a good one. It was one of the better ones.
Good, thank you very much. But also, but he was also incredibly unpopular. I mean, he was described as the Darth Vader of the Bush administration. There was a lot of menace there and quite a bit of mirth.
Yeah. No, I mean, he was a complicated guy. He had a sense of humor. He loved the Darth Vader moniker. He says, "Oh, that makes people fear me. I mean, I'll wear it proudly." And in fact, it grew and grew, and sometimes with justification. He kneecapped lots of people. Lots of people got thrown out the door. If you opposed Dick Cheney, something Cheney wanted done, often your days were numbered. And interestingly, Bush and he have a breach not until 2006. This is 6 years into Bush's terms, into his second term, 2 years, where they had a split over Cheney wanting Bush to give a pardon to a guy named Scooter Libby, who was Cheney's top aide. Bush was like, no, he violated the law. I'm not doing it. And hey, wait a second, I'm the president. And it was kind of a moment of clarity for Bush that Cheney had hijacked his presidency. And Cheney was more or less out after that for the last 2 years. But up until then, the big events of the time were significantly driven by Dick Cheney, to the consequence all across the world, mind you. Wars,
and many people would say in very bad ways. Just finally, I mean, he urged people to vote for Kamala Harris last year. You heard him earlier in that clip saying that President Trump is the biggest threat to democracy that America's ever known.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, even though Cheney pushed forward lots of illegal activities, he bent out rule of law to fit the needs or the desires of he and the president. He, at the end of the day, says, wait a second, Trump has gone too far. Cheney certainly abided by the dictate of the electorate. He felt that Trump had really broken the code and gone into off the edge of the map in a way that Cheney stood up and stood fairly forcefully, as did his daughter Liv, to say, hey, this man, he has to be stopped. And so now it's interesting as you see the folks around Donald Trump trying to figure out what to say about Cheney, who had such long service as well inside of the conservative movement in America that Trump in a way is a part of. But he and Trump, if you're an enemy of Donald Trump, which Cheney becomes at the end of his life, I'm not sure what I can really say about you.
Ron Suskind, thank you very much indeed.